So back in June of 1996, I stood in the hospital room with my mother while she was being told by her physician, you have a tumor in your pancreas and it's cancer. And so I right away looked at the doctor and said, okay, what do we do from here? I'm kind of like a get it done. Let's figure out what it is. Let's go. And that doctor just simply stared at his feet.
According to the American Cancer Society, around over 67,000 people will be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2025, and over 50,000 people will die of pancreatic cancer. The PanCan network has done a tremendous job not only raising awareness of the disease, but improving treatment and quality of life for pancreatic cancer patients. These efforts by the PanCan network and other advocacy groups have resulted in increased NIH funding, $235 million invested in research. Since 2010, 19 new drugs have been approved to treat pancreatic cancer. Your organization has funded early career investigator awards to engage and empower our physician scientists of tomorrow to find solutions for this huge healthcare problem. And as you mentioned, Pam, your work over these years has helped drive the improvement of 5-year survival from somewhere around 5% to now 13%.
This is Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast for patients.
Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Pamela Acosta Marquardt, the inspiring founder of the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, and Julie Fleshman, its president and CEO. Thank you both for the outstanding life-saving work you're doing and for being a guest on Genetics for Healthcare. Pam, your story is really the heart of PanCan. We were talking in the green room before we went live, and I told you how long I've actually been following the organization. But can you share the personal experience that led you to channel your energy into this organization?
So back in June of 1996, I stood in the hospital room with my mother while she was being told by her physician, you have a tumor in your pancreas and it's cancer. And so I right away looked at the doctor and said, okay, what do we do from here? I'm kind of like a get it done. Let's figure out what it is. Let's go. And that doctor just simply stared at his feet. Oh my gosh. Right away, I thought to myself, this is the cancer that Michael Landon had. And he went public with it. And I recall that he went really quickly. And I thought, wow, with all of his celebrity and his fame, if he couldn't save himself, how am I going to save my mother? And then I thought, no, you got to remember, this is back in 1996 and the internet was fairly new. I had just gotten my first computer. I thought, I know, I'll go onto that new World Wide Web and I'll find the organization that's dealing with pancreatic cancer. But guess what? There was none. So my mom was given 3 to 6 months to live, and being the very compliant patient that she was gone within 6 months. But during that time, what I did find on the internet was a small moderated chat group that was provided by Johns Hopkins. There was a pathologist there, Dr. Ralph Rubin, who thought it was important to have a place so that people could at least come together. And it was very small at the time, but it became my lifeline. And I was on that chat board multiple times during the day as my mind kept turning and thinking, wow, this is so crazy. And I had started to dig a little more and found out there was a lot of celebrities beyond just Michael Landon that had died from pancreatic cancer and nobody talked about it. So, I mean, people like Donna Reed, Jack Benny, Fernando Lamas, the list just goes on. And Juliet Prowse was, I think, the month before after my mom. And I had just watched what had happened in the whole HIV AIDS movement, that taboo disease. Nobody wanted to talk about it until Michael Jackson and Elizabeth Taylor came out and lent their celebrity voices to the cause. And all of a sudden, they start finding answers and people are living beyond an HIV diagnosis. So I thought, it's the celebrity voice that matters. That's what can get some attention to this disease. But what am I going to do? The celebrities are all gone. They were victims of this horrible, horrible disease. I know, I'll go to the families. So came up with this crazy idea, and I come from the school. I always say, we joke about this, if you're too stupid to know something can't be done, you just forge ahead and do it, right?
There's a lot of truth in that. Yes.
So that was me. I was very passionate. My mother had by this time had passed away. And I thought, this is crazy that nobody's doing anything about it. And came up with this idea is I am going to produce the first ever fundraiser for pancreatic cancer. I had found out that there was a researcher at Johns Hopkins that actually wanted to study early detection for pancreatic cancer, but there was no money for a lab. And I'm thinking to myself, this is Johns Hopkins. Like, I had no idea that the scientists need to procure the funding that they need to continue their studies and their important work. I spoke to Johns Hopkins and I said, gosh, what does he need? Like a petri dish, a microscope, And they said, no, it's much more than that. And they said, it's about $400,000 that we need to raise so that Dr. Michael Goggins can have his lab that he is envisioning. So long story short, started connecting the dots and pulled together all of the celebrity families that had been touched by pancreatic cancer and lost their loved ones. And on November 8th, 1998, produced the first ever black tie celebrity gala in Beverly Hills at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And we netted by the hair of our chinny chin chin, just the amount of money we needed to get that lab started. 3 months later, started PanCan on February 8th of 1999. And a few months later, after that, got introduced to Julie, because I believe Julie had reached out to Johns Hopkins and said, I need to do something about this. I just lost my father at only 52 years old. And they connected me with Julie, and Julie jumped in, and I was volunteering. Julie was volunteering. And in the year 2000, Julie became our first ever staff member as our executive director. And then in 2004, the board appointed her president and CEO. And she has led the charge since 2000 when she stepped in full force and committed her life to this. And under Julie's leadership, this has become such an amazing movement, and not just here in the States, but worldwide, as we were very instrumental in developing the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition that Julie also chairs. It's just been a labor of love, a labor of passion and commitment. And we're thrilled to be here to share more information. And you'll be very excited about some of the things that Julie will be able to share.
I look at things where there's no solution or an adequate solution and say, well, how can we improve upon that? Or how can we meet the need of those who are dealing with this problem? And I like to ask founders of our patient advocacy groups that come on the podcast, like, what was missing? Or it seems, I hate to say this, but it sounds like there was nothing.
There
Even
was
Johns
nothing.
Hopkins.
There was nothing at all. At the time, when my mother was diagnosed, the 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer was 4%. To this date, we have 3x that. We're at 13% now. While that's a huge improvement, it's not nearly enough to get this disease across the finish line to where we know that anybody diagnosed with pancreatic cancer will thrive.
According to the American Cancer Society, around over 67,000 people will be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2025, and over 50,000 people will die of pancreatic cancer. Can you guys tell us, like, for listeners who may not know, what is it about pancreatic cancer? Or for that matter, let's start first. What does the pancreas do in our body, and why is it so uniquely challenging to diagnose and treat compared to other cancers that we find in our body?
Julie, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So, and those numbers you quoted are in the United States. 67,000 Americans will be diagnosed, but
Thank you for that distinction. Yes.
Yeah, much broader worldwide. So, one of the things that makes pancreatic cancer so challenging is there is no early detection test for the disease. So, usually by the time it's diagnosed, it's late stage. The cancer has metastasized to other organs. A couple of different things. One is the pancreas is located deep in your abdominal cavity. A doctor once explained it to me, if you were going to hide something somewhere in your body, you would hide it in your pancreas. So it sort of gives you a good visual image of this thing like deep in your abdominal cavity that you can't see, you can't touch it. It's not like your breast where you can feel it and see if you have a lump, right? You can't get at it. And then the symptoms for pancreatic cancer are very benign. They're things like weight loss, stomach pain, back pain, things that we all experience for many different reasons. Those symptoms don't necessarily lead a patient to go in and say, I think, I have cancer, much less pancreatic cancer. And the doctors many times don't hear those symptoms and automatically think pancreatic cancer. So we need an early detection test, and then we need better treatments to treat the disease. And so those are some of the things that obviously PanCan is working on, but those are the things that make the disease so challenging to treat.
You guys have done a tremendous job. And Pam, I didn't know the organization started in 1998. I've just been following
1999. We started our efforts back, the day my mom was diagnosed, really, but it just morphed into an actual organization in early 1999.
I started following, and I've been in the industry, but I'd started following in around 2010 when gene sequencing was becoming more relevant and patients were starting to have access to it. The PanCan network has done a tremendous job not only raising awareness of the disease, but improving treatment and quality of life for pancreatic cancer patients. As I mentioned, I'm a newsletter subscriber. I've noticed just how active you guys have been with outreach and just the quality of the outreach where you guys are. I mean, we'll have all of the social media links on our episode page at geneticsforhealthcare.com that you can connect with them too. But I'm just read this. These are some of the numbers that you guys have posted on your website in terms of making a difference when you raise awareness and making a difference with raising money so we can fund research. You've heard Pam's story. These efforts by the PanCan network and other advocacy groups have resulted in increased NIH funding. $235 million invested in research. Since 2010, 19 new drugs have been approved to treat pancreatic cancer. Your organization has funded early career investigator awards to engage and empower our physician scientists of tomorrow to find solutions for this huge healthcare problem. And as you mentioned, Pam, your work over these years has helped drive the improvement of 5-year survival from somewhere around 5% to now 13%. But you guys have an even more ambitious plan. Julie, your 5-year action plan to drive the 5-year survival rate to 20% in the next 5 years. That includes the early detection initiative that you were talking about. Can you tell us more about how you plan to do that?
So, as you said, I think PanCan has always been the catalyst in the field for driving progress and driving momentum. In the early days, let's face it, science follows money. And so in the early days, there was no money being invested privately, or the federal government was not investing money in the disease. So PanCan went about advocating for increased federal funding and then also raising money from, individuals to help us to fund more research in the field. And so that's really gotten us to where we are today. Today, there is a robust pancreatic cancer research community that simply did not exist, 2.5 decades ago. And so we took some time this last year to really step back and say, where are we in the field? What are the issues today? And what do we need to do to continue to drive progress forward? And so we have really 5 areas of focus, continuing to build the field. The field is much bigger and, stronger than it was 2.5 decades ago, but we still need to attract junior investigators into the field. We still need senior investigators taking what they've learned in other areas and bringing it to the pancreatic cancer field. Today, more than ever, federal funding is at risk, and we need to continue to ensure that federal dollars are available for our pancreatic cancer community. We've finally gotten here to this point where we can start to accelerate progress. Now is not the time to pull back. So PanCan's advocacy efforts, I think, are going to be really important. They have been important in the climate that we are in and will probably prove to continue to be extremely important. So continuing to build the field, continuing to ensure the field has the resources that it needs. Early detection. We still don't have an early detection test for pancreatic cancer. So focusing on early detection, having an early detection test would incredibly change the outcomes for patients, just that alone. So we have an early detection initiative, as you mentioned, and I can talk, more about what exactly that is. The third area of focus is therapeutics. right? Even if we diagnose the disease earlier, we know patients have relapse. We know we still need better treatment options. So continuing to drive and accelerate treatments, ensuring patients get on clinical trials that are available to them, that are best for them. And that's, of course, where genetic and biomarker testing come in to ensure that patients understand the information about their tumor and can find the best treatment for them. Fourth area is using AI and data. How can we better use all this information that we're learning from all these PanCan initiatives? Can we make that information available to the field to accelerate research that's being done and accelerate progress? And then finally, the fifth area is empowering patients. All research is great, but it's not great if it doesn't get to the patients who actually need it today, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, a patient's diagnosed today, and how do they take advantage of all of this excitement and all of this momentum? And it is mind-boggling when you're diagnosed with a challenging disease like pancreatic cancer. Then you go online and you start to try to figure out what you should do and where you should go and what's the best clinical trial or not a clinical trial. I mean, it's overwhelming, right, for patients and families. So our PanCan's patient services program, to me, is just sort of the key critical foundational program to ensure that patients have access and information about all of the open and enrolling clinical trials. Who are the specialists? What's available in their community depending on how far they can travel? What support services are available for patients and families? They're having a hard time, eating food and digesting food and keeping food down. What information and resources do they need? So to me, that's kind of that is the crux of everything that PanCan does, is ensuring patients and families have the information or resources they need to get the latest and greatest, and that they can make informed decisions. And then with that, we learn from all of those people, and we continue to fund these other areas of research to move the field forward.
And I might add in too, all that Julie is talking about, we offer at no cost to the patient and their family members. I tell everybody, and a lot of the patients and family members find their way to me. So I talk to a lot of them and interact and make sure to get them off to a case manager to help them even further. But I tell every family that has a loved one diagnosed with pancreatic cancer that I feel that it is critically important that one of PanCan's case managers occupy a seat at the patient's care table. It's that critical in making a difference. And given that there's no cost to it to the patient and it's only a benefit, it becomes a really significant benefit in changing the lives of patients.
I usually say, let's put a pin in that and kind of come back to it. But there are so many pins I was putting in things that you guys were saying. I just let that be and go back, hit, the rewind button a few times, because I think this probably could have been all about 5-year plan, the early detection initiative. Let's talk about genetics. A lot of people worry about their own risk of developing or being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer if a family member has had pancreatic cancer, and it can be very confusing. Let's just talk about genetics versus genomics, right? Because you can have a genetic variant that increases your risk of developing pancreatic cancer. You can certainly not have that, but still be at risk. Can you talk briefly about like germline versus genomic testing, tumor testing, and what resources you guys provide to help patients and their families kind of educate themselves and advocate for themselves?
So what we know today, which is exciting that we absolutely didn't know to tell patients, 10 years ago, is that both germline and genomic testing are important for pancreatic cancer patients, right? And today it is recommended, it's part of the NCCN guidelines, that every pancreatic cancer patient should get both genetic and biomarker testing. And we know that today in part because of some of what PanCan has done historically. So back in 2012, PanCan launched a program called Know Your Tumor. It's a personalized medicine service. And the idea was that we would offer to patients, no matter where they were being treated across the country, to get biomarker. At the time, it was just biomarker testing, and eventually added genetic testing to that as well. And through that, Today now we have enrolled over 3,300 patients in Know Your Tumor, and we follow those patients. So we follow them through, what treatment do they end up getting on, and what is the outcome. And we've basically been able to publish several different publications with our Know Your Tumor data. Some of the most important and relevant publications were back in the 2016, 2017, 2018 timeframe, which basically showed that for those patients that had an actionable alteration who went on the matched therapy, they did better, which logically makes sense, but that had never been shown and proven. And so now through PanCan's publications, as well as other researchers who have published similar type information, the NCCN guidelines now, recommend that all patients get genetic and biomarker testing. When someone calls into PanCan's patient services, our case managers ensure that patient or family member understands that recommendation. And then we can provide resources for how to get genetic and biomarker testing, or we can also enroll patients in our Know Your Tumor program still. We still offer that service today. Many patients today now get it on their own because the doctors today see the value in doing that. But you'd be surprised, even though it is a recommendation in the NCCN guidelines, there are still many patients that are not told that that is important or that it's necessary. And so the role we play just in educating and making sure patients go back to talk to their doctors about this recommendation is really important.
Powerful information. And just to put a bow on this for those, we're going to have the link to the Know Your Tumor webpage. They've got a ton of great information on their website, but we'll have a direct link inside of wherever you're listening to this, Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube. We'll have that link where you can go and find that information. I just wanted to put a bow on this because we talk about genetics and genomics broadly on different topics here on Genetics for Healthcare. She mentioned germline genetic testing. These are the genes that you inherit from mom and dad that might increase your risk of different diseases. Now, the thing is, if you test positive for one of these genes, does not mean you're going to develop the disease, but you can be empowered and informed about your risk and have these conversations not only with your care providers, but also your family. For those who have been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, tumor profiling or biomarker testing is referred to as genomics. And you can test the actual tumor itself for the genes that might be driving your tumor growth. Just wanted to put a bow on that. Again, that information is on their website and you can hit that link. There's also some increasing data, some emerging data on the relationship between diabetes and pancreatic cancer. Can you help us understand that a little more?
So what we understand today is that new onset diabetes after the age of 50. So this is, you're over 50 and suddenly you get diabetes. That's new onset diabetes. That is potentially a symptom of pancreatic cancer. But we don't yet know how to identify which people is it a symptom of pancreatic cancer and which people is it just they're getting diabetes. And so this is one of the only symptoms that is not related to genetics and to a hereditary pancreatic cancer. And so that's why PanCan decided to focus in on new onset diabetes. And we are doing a large cohort study. We've actually already enrolled all of the patients for the study. So about over 8,800 patients were enrolled in this study. The enrollment was completed in March of this year. And the other interesting thing that we know is when you get new onset diabetes, you will develop your pancreatic cancer within 3 years of that diagnosis of diabetes, which is interesting because in many big cohort studies, you have to follow patients for a really long time. Like in lung cancer studies, as an example, you might have to follow patients for 20 years before you can analyze and really understand what's happening. In this case, it's just a 3-year time period. So the clock sort of for that 3-year time period, if you will, started when we finished the enrollment in March. We will do a 1-year analysis in early 2026 and then a 3-year analysis in 2028. And the idea is what we're hoping to be able to show is that for those people who have new-onset diabetes and sort of these other clinical factors, can we identify the pancreatic cancer earlier so that you can do surgery and the outcomes are better? I mean, that's ultimately what the goal of the study is. So we're excited that we were able to enroll the patients. That's enrolling those patients is a very different population than what we normally, our audience is people who have pancreatic cancer or who have had pancreatic cancer. In this case, we needed to be enrolling patients that know nothing about pancreatic cancer. They were just diagnosed with diabetes. So working with more general practitioners. So anyways, the launch of the study and the study design was all very interesting for an organization like us because we sort of had to break out of our pancreatic cancer field and go much broader.
Just a bit of information. I interviewed Michael, who runs the Snyder Lab at Stanford University and is responsible for making all these sensors and Oura Ring and glucose monitors. The one thing that he did mention to get a continuous glucose monitor in terms of a barometer for health, because when you get to a certain age, which I am, you really need to be aware of what's normal for you and what changes in your glucose and what spikes it and those types of things. So I've been particularly interested about that. So I appreciate you sharing the background for the study and the work that you're doing.
Yeah. And the glucose monitoring is part of this study. And so again, once we have, results, we may better be able to direct people to what does that mean? What are you looking for? What's a significant change? Those are some of the learnings that will hopefully come from this study.
Pam, I got to ask you about the NIH and the lost funding, over $800 million. I don't know if that's in 1 year, dedicated, allocated resources to the NIH, but we know that's lost. The PanCan network has demonstrated how the power of patient advocacy directly influences research and drug development. But with these recent changes, how could this impact the 5-year plan, and what role can our listeners who are interested play in helping out?
Back in the early days, we did not have the money to directly fund research, but we knew we had big mouths, big feet to stomp, and we took it to the hill. We have made so much progress over the years. And with regards to the current situation with what's going on, I'm going to let Julie really speak to that, because Julie herself personally has been on the Hill with the legislators, with the medical researchers, and really been able to have some impact. So Julie, why don't you share a little bit about, what your Hill visits look like and what has been accomplished?
It's an interesting environment right now. There's sort of two things that are important for pancreatic cancer researchers. One is the NIH, which of course the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, is where the majority of federal dollars that are invested in cancer research come from. And the majority of academic labs around the country get their funding from the National Cancer Institute, right? Organizations like PanCan just help kind of supplement and provide an emphasis in certain things, but the majority of funding comes from the federal government. So that's one area. That's the majority of the funding that potentially is at stake for our researchers. The other is the Department of Defense actually has a congressionally directed medical research program. And that program has line items for certain diseases. So different at the NIH, you can't go to Congress and ask for a certain amount for a particular disease, but for this program that's in the Department of Defense, it actually allocates specific dollars. And so prior to 2015, I think, there was no pancreatic cancer research program at the Department of Defense. And through PanCan's advocacy efforts, we actually helped to create a pancreatic cancer program at the Department of Defense, originally just funded at $6 million. And then through advocacy efforts, it was up to $15 million. And we're trying to, of course, increase that. That program was eliminated, a recent CR in 2025. So that was devastating. After all these efforts over the last, 10 years to create the program, and then you have to advocate for it every year. It doesn't just stay, right? You have to continue to raise your voice and continue to ask for more and show why more is even necessary. So, our community and our field does an amazing job at that. To have it completely eliminated was really devastating. funding. And again, it's $15 million. It's not, hundreds of millions, but still it's $15 million pot that was just for our research community. I am proud to say, and the deal is not done yet, that through our advocacy efforts over the last few months, pancreatic cancer program in the FY26 appropriations, which Congress is still debating, the pancreatic cancer research program of the Department of Defense is back in both the House and the Senate. So that was a big deal. And it's the only one that was eliminated that is back in. And again, I have no doubt it is because of our advocates and being really loud. I've been up on the Hill several times, have gone up with some researchers. So it's in the bill. Now the bill has to get passed. So that's a whole nother story. And then on the NCI side, actually, today, the full Appropriations Committee is meeting. Surprisingly, in the subcommittee, which is the step that comes before what's happening today, both the House and the Senate kept NIH funding at levels equal to or a little bit more than FY25, which is very different, opposite than what the administration's budget recommended. The administration's budget recommended for a 40% reduction to NIH funding, which is, I don't even have the right word to describe the devastation of what that would create. Congress seems to understand why this funding is so important and has kept it, if it is flat, I think we'd all be super excited compared to what we sort of thought might happen. But so we'll see what happens today. Today is an important day because it's the full Appropriations Committee debating a bunch of different things. So we'll see where they land. And then by the end of September, so the government's budget starts October 1. So all the appropriations bills need to be passed by the end of September. The word on the street is that most likely that's not going to happen. There's too many disagreements on lots of different bills. And most likely, if there's no CR, there would be a government shutdown, but most likely there'll be another CR. So that was maybe more detailed than you wanted to know, but it is an ongoing, a needed effort for people to raise their hand, to write to their member of Congress, to tell their story and talk about, in our case, why pancreatic cancer research is so important.
That was simply a masterclass in how stuff gets done. Thank you for that, because that is wearing a lot of hats to get something done on both your parts. I'll let you go with this. Here on Genetics for Healthcare, whether we're interviewing patients who have firsthand experience with conquering their disease or being a care provider, or experts in the field, I always like to ask them for practical tips, because the reality is there is probably someone watching who just got a terrifying diagnosis, or their loved one got a terrifying diagnosis of pancreatic cancer and they feel paralyzed. Pam, I'll ask you first. If you could give 3 practical tips, what are the most critical things that they should do first at this stage once they hear that phrase, you have pancreatic cancer?
I will share with your audience what I share with patients and their families every single day when I talk to people is the very first thing you need to do, call into our patient services. And I know you'll have a link up for this, but the number is simply 877-2-PanCan, PANCAN, or that's 877-272-6226. Ask to speak to a case manager. That's step number 1. Step number 2, and this is another just really strong belief that I have, is no matter what it is in life that you are diagnosed with, but especially when it comes to pancreatic cancer, my question is, has even one person ever survived this? And if that answer is yes, then why not you? Why not me? And my third suggestion would be to keep a positive attitude. Surround yourself with the love and support of your family, and make sure that that case manager, that no-cost case manager, occupies a seat at your care table.
Those were spot on. Maybe the only thing that I would add is, while it is urgent when you get a diagnosis to take next steps, it's not an emergency. The decisions don't have to be made today. It is better to get all the information, Make sure you're going to the right specialist who sees a high volume of pancreatic cancer patients. Make sure you understand your treatment options. I think what many people don't understand is if you start down one treatment path, then some clinical trials will no longer be available to you. So understanding all of that up front, taking a little bit of time to get to the right specialist, to get onto the right treatment, to do the right tests before you get onto the right treatment is critical ultimately in having, a journey that you feel empowered and you're making the best decisions for your care.
I might add to that really quick. Everything that Julie just said, a lot of that information is what our patient services case managers can provide to the family so that they and the patient can make informed decisions. That's not something we expect them to jump online and go gather all this information. That's why we're here.
And that's why we do Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast for patients, to bring you this information so you can have the resources, the language, and the confidence to advocate for yourself or your loved one to get the care you need and to have some confidence to talk about how you can leverage genetic and genomic insights for better care. Pamela Acosta Marquardt and Julie Fleshman with the Pancreatic Cancer Network. Thank you guys for being guests on Genetics for Healthcare.
Thank you so much for having us. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
This is Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast for patients.